You're listening to the Sellable Art That Feels Like Me podcast with Michele Luminato. Join me as I share my journey of creating art that truly resonates with me and how it has translated into successful sales. My goal is to empower you with insights and strategies so that you can confidently create and sell art that feels authentically you. Today, we're going to talk about 7 tips for overcoming overwhelm and getting clarity in a direction. I have noticed a lot of artists struggling with overwhelm, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. We are seeing a lot of things on Instagram while we're scrolling, and we may be overwhelmed by all the artists and all the ideas and all the different directions that we could go as artists. You might also be feeling torn between family commitments and unsure of where to spend your time. I know for me, this is something that I always juggle myself, and sometimes it just feels like there is just too many things to do. And sometimes it feels like our art suffers and we actually get paralyzed by it. I don't know if you feel this way, but I've seen this every year I've ever been an artist. You might be feeling completely pulled in all sorts of directions and overwhelmed by everything that you're inspired by. And I think this is common, especially when you're really immersed in all the things that you're inspired by. I know for myself, it has been a real journey of sifting and sorting so that I can actually figure out what to focus on. So why does this happen? Why are we overwhelmed by all these things? I think there's so much constant exposure to other artists' work on platforms like Instagram, and that can lead to comparison, making artists, and including myself, feel like their work isn't good enough and it's not unique enough. And that clouds the creative judgment. And I think this is a huge issue. The blessing is that we can all be on social media, but it kind of is a curse at the same time. You might still be in the process of understanding your own identity, and you might find it challenging to express what your unique voice is. And that can lead to mimicking of other people's style. So this overwhelm, I think, is really around the lack of self-identity, meaning you're not really clear what you're all about, and so you feel really pulled into other directions because you're not really standing on solid ground. Another thing is you may have this lack of confidence, and I know it pains me to talk about this because I have been here myself, but a lot of artists, I think, have a lack of confidence in their own artistic choices, and this can make a lot of artists hesitant to commit to a distinctive style, and they're fearing that what they're doing won't be well received. And I can say I've been there myself with this, so this is something that I've seen. And again, this is really a lack of security or insecurity around your personal style or voice. And let's not forget information overload. We are in times where there is a vast amount of available resources, tutorials, courses, all the things, free YouTube videos, even me. And that can really lead to confusion and difficulty in deciding which direction to take creatively. So I think there is a common thing that we're going to have that will be information overload for decades. It's not going away. It's more about learning how to really deal with this information overload. And then there's perfectionism. This is something that I've definitely seen a struggle with my own studio over the years, and that is the desire to create this perfect piece of artwork. And that feels like this pursuit of something that we're never satisfied with because we're always in this pursuit of perfection. And I think that can also lead to constant experimentation without settling in a direction of a personal style. And again, it's a strive for perfectionism, and the reality is perfectionism doesn't really exist. But I think sometimes we can get in this overwhelm mode because we just can't achieve that perfectionism, and we kind of have unrealistic goals around that. There might be this fear of failure as well. Maybe there's a worry, and I know I felt this myself, the worry that choosing the wrong path might lead to failure. And this can really lead us to feel paralyzed in making any decision. And it can hinder the development of our unique voice. I can't even tell you, well, you're here on this podcast, how many times that I have had that fear of failure come up in my artwork in over all the years. I mean, I don't think this is something that we ever escape. I think it's really learning how to get in a place where we can dismantle that so that we're not paralyzed by that and really don't do anything. I think another thing that is common that can happen is that we can rely heavily on external approval from others. And that can really detour and take us off the path of pursuing ideas that truly resonate with us individually. So we may think, well, this is popular, so this is well liked, maybe this is better. And so we're always looking for that external validation instead of really looking internally. And I know this is something I'm going to talk a lot about on this podcast because I've seen it in my own journey. And I was so heavily externally focused on validation that I used to ask the kids, the dog, my husband, I mean, literally everyone who would come into the room with my art. And the more I get in touch with the internal side, the less I have to worry about external validation. One of the things that is very true to my path and what I've experienced is burnout from trying to maintain a productivity or keeping up with trends that can really leave little energy for personal creative expression and exploration. And I think the problem with this and why that can really, we can get overwhelmed by creative burnout is because we don't have the energy to put into our individual unique perspective and explore that and wander through that in a way. We're always busy cranking out the next thing. And I think that creative burnout is a real thing that creates overwhelm, but it really strips us from doing the work that actually matters. At least that's what I found in my own journey. I think the other thing is we have sometimes points in our journey where we're not really clear on the goals or the vision. And you might find yourself aimlessly jumping from one idea to the other without this sense of direction. And I think that really goes to this bucket of lack of artistic goals. And again, goals is a big bucket. And I know people use the word goals heavily in this modern world. But I think sometimes when we're unclear of where we want to go, we just jump around because we just can't figure out how to move forward. And so we have this lack of goals of where the next step is, and we aimlessly jump around. So if this resonates with you, the last one is probably going to make a lot of sense as well. You may have a unique vision, but you might struggle translating it into your artwork. And that could be due to a lack of skills or confidence in the execution of it. You may think, okay, I got this feeling. I know what this vision's about, but I'm not sure how it translates. And that's just a process that takes time. And so that difficulty in articulating your vision, I think, is a real thing. And that can lead to overwhelm. And sometimes we just shut down when we have overwhelm. And then, when you layer all these things together, and sometimes we have multiple things happening at once, it's complete overwhelm. And when I layer in me being a parent and running a family and doing all those family things, I literally get stopped in my tracks. So I have to really pick and choose what actually matters to me. And even making decisions about what I'm going to cook, it's a bit of a joke, but it's a real thing that my brain is just, by the end of the day, I don't always want to put my energy into solving that overwhelm of what I'm cooking for dinner. And so I get an overwhelm around cooking dinner. So there is a lot that we take on, and especially as women, it's a real thing. And so today we're going to talk about those 7 tips for overcoming overwhelm and getting clarity on a direction. Now, again, these are through my lens. This is just the way that I think and do things. So take what resonates with you. And if multiple things resonate with you, then definitely jump in and use these. So tip number 1 is identifying your core interests can be really, really helpful. And this is what I always teach in Origin Art. Begin by narrowing down themes, subjects, styles, and even more specifically than that, in a way that helps you constantly understand and resonate with yourself, regardless of trends or external influences. And when we know this, then we're not so wobbly when it comes to directions on this. Tip number 2 is the art of selective focus. And this is where I think I'm constantly juggling with this as well. And that is how to prioritize ideas that truly excite you, helping to reduce the overwhelm of too many options. I mean, as artists, we get so excited and so inspired. And a lot of times we have really great ideas and we want to do all of them. But because we have so many interests and we love this and we love this, we just can't do it all. And we have to really focus on what actually gets us excited right now. And I'm a big fan of saying it doesn't mean that you can't go back and do it later. It just means right now you're going to focus on this one path. And that can help lead to clarity and stopping the overwhelm. Tip number 3, developing a unique voice. I think this is so valuable. And what I mean by this is when you use strategies for distilling your diverse influences, we all take into a coherent and personal vision that distinguishes your art from others, it can make a real difference. And I know for me, I went through a really heavy duty, what I call like almost like an onboarding of my own unique voice. And again, that is what I teach in the inspiration to creation process in Origin Art. But that really will help you take on board your uniqueness rather than always feeling influenced by other people. And so I think developing your unique voice can help because that helps shut down so much noise when you're listening to your own unique voice. Tip number 4, embracing creative constraints. And this one seems really simple, but I know for myself, setting limitations on materials, color palettes, or themes, whatever that you work with, and creating boundaries can actually enhance that creativity and solidify your artistic identity. And so even though, we're artists and we don't want any rules, we almost need to set up our own creative constraints and our own rules for about how we do things. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't change that down the line, but you can make up a set of constraints now and work with those to create clarity and then discard it and modify it later. Tip number 5, the role of self-assessment and reflection, I think, is hugely underestimated. And I know this has been a really powerful tool for me. It's important to regularly self-evaluate to understand what aspects of your work genuinely reflect your vision and which are influenced by external pressures. And what I mean by that is sometimes we even take on things that are external ways that we see things that might be from our parents, that might be from friends. Like there's all these external things that kind of put into our bucket of what we think we want. And I think for me, I've gotten better at doing this. I had a lot of problems with really knowing who I was earlier in my 20s and 30s and even 40s for that matter. And the more I get better at this, the easier it is to understand more about myself. So I'm a huge fan of self-reflection and self-assessment and saying, do I actually want that? Or do I actually believe that? Does this actually matter to me more or does this? So take the time is definitely my tip for this. Take the time for self-reflection and self-assessment and make sure you really tune in to you. Tip number 6, building a consistent practice. Now, I know that sounds very obvious, but this is a little bit different. This is about showing up for yourself regularly, even for an hour, just to create a disciplined art practice that allows exploration. And so, of course, if we're an artist, we're always showing up, but are we actually showing up to explore and have that creativity just be completely raw and unregulated? And I think that really aids in that gradual emergence of a unique voice. I think when we only go in to be productive, I put in air quotes because, once we start having this as our career path, we feel like we have to be productive. And the reality is, exploring is highly productive. And yet, so very often we feel like we're not allowed to do that. So, one of the tips that I have definitely integrated into my practice is allowing myself to have exploration. It used to be just once a week. I literally would say, all right, on Friday, you can just play, you don't have to do anything, and you can explore. That was how I initially started doing this constant practice. And then I eventually started integrating it an hour. So at the end of each studio day, I would say, okay, for the last hour, you're going to just play. And now, because it's so important to my practice, I pretty much just build it in all the time now. So that is a tip that I think is really highly valuable. Tip number 7 is really jumping into community where you can get that honest and constructive feedback to help see your work from a new perspective and encourage your unique artistic development. And why I say this is that seeking constructive feedback can be super helpful. I have seen so many artists get so hard on themselves and so distraught with their work that they just can't see the value in it. And so I recommend making sure that you put yourself in a space that allows you to see it for what it is, because sometimes the struggle of the actual process gets in the way of us seeing it from a really, really great perspective that's a healthy perspective. So if you don't have a safe place, as in like, don't ask the kids and the dogs, they're not going to give you constructive feedback. So constructive feedback is someone or a group of people who can actually give you feedback that is highly valuable. I think this is really important because I've seen a lot of good artists try to kill really good work because they're just not seeing it from the vantage point. Like they're just being way too hard on themselves and they're being way too hard on the art. And that's usually because the struggle was in the process and they just got really down on the actual piece because of it. So make sure that you use this as a really important tip that could save some really great artwork. And the bonus tip is quiet the IG noise. I know this seems really obvious, but this has made a really massive difference in the last few years for myself. Reduce the amount of time that you scroll and decide what you are there to do. And I'm going to say that one more time. Decide what you are there to do. What's your goal? Why are you even on it? Is it to, one, connect with the art community? Is that why you're there? Is it two, connect with marketing partners like retailers, galleries, interior designers, all the people that you do business with that are in the same sort of industry? Or are you connecting with your potential art collectors? Those 3 objectives are the 3 things that I focus on. And if you're endlessly scrolling without the intention, it will definitely derail you. It does derail me constantly. So I'm constantly going, okay, why am I here? What am I doing? So my strategy for this is start with the bottom one first, which is connect with your potential art collectors. That's what I do when I go on Instagram. My goal would be I'm going to post a story or I'm going to post a post or a reel, whatever it is, whatever the goal is for that. That's how I'm connecting with my potential collectors, because normally what happens is when I post a story or a reel or a post, I will start to have DMs with them, and that actual post or story will engage people in conversations about my work. So that's the number one goal. Then if I have time, I will jump in and connect with the art community, or I might also connect with marketing partners. And how I do that is I'm just scrolling, I'm commenting on the feeds that come through. I might go search to see, hey, I haven't seen so-and-so in a while. Let me go see what they're doing. And I might do that. And then I hop off. And then I'm literally like, okay, off, I'm done, because those 3 goals are met. And therefore, there's no reason for me to stay on it anymore. So that is my tip for that. And if any of these resonated with you, let me know. I would love to hear what resonated most with you. And if you have any tips, I'm always open to hearing more tips. But these are the key things that I do on how to basically calm my brain down for overwhelm and how to get clarity in a specific direction and just move forward. So thanks for joining me today. Stay tuned for more episodes. And if you enjoyed this, please share it with others. Tap that follow button in your favorite podcast app for new updates. You can also find a version of this on YouTube at Michele Luminato Studio. So if you want to watch the podcast in video, find me over on YouTube. We have a lot to talk about on this podcast. My goal is to share my story and the story of others to empower you to make sellable art that feels like you too. And if you're curious about my paintings, you can find my artwork on Instagram at Michele Luminato. And if you're excited about what is happening in these podcasts, if you could rate and review it on Apple Podcasts, it would mean the world to me. I hope to see you on Instagram, also at originart_with_Michele. That's where I also do little clips of the podcast and dedicated to talking to artists. I will see you there.